Running Sentences presents Bumbling Humbling Nights, Part 8. Negotiations commence. Upon returning to the house and catching a nap, Marcus finds himself thrown into this negotiations for peace. But no one wants to budge, because they're all politicians and, well, they just don't like one another. This is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, and situations within this story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real people, real stories, real incidences, real events, although far-fetched, is purely coincidental. Copyright 2021. Michael Honore. All rights reserved. Marcus blinked, and then blinked again. She had asked him the one question he didn't mind answering, but always led to a lot of confused looks at him. He'd rather avoid that, even if she was a witch, and a cute one at that. His past, and if he was from somewhere else, was certainly a heavy topic. And if I am, Cassia, does it matter? No, I don't think it does matter, but it does mean you need to be treated a bit differently between us. How? Why? Why would you treat me differently? You would obviously want to go home, and you'll eventually leave here because of that. Of course, you're going to be treated differently from someone who I know is going to stay here and help this world. A noise near the beer elevator drew both of their attention as they got up tiredly. Maureen then appeared in front of them when it came to a stop and stepped out to see them. Ah, you're back. Good. And with that, she snapped her fingers. In a blink, they'd been brought to a bedroom, which Marcus figured was in this strange house that the old lady called home, but none of that mattered, as he exhaustedly plodded over towards a bed, and then fell onto it, face first, and it only took him a few seconds to fall asleep. When he opened them again, he found that there was no windows to give him any sign of what time it was, and having accidentally rolled out of bed at some point during the night, he got up, not because he wanted to, but because sleep decided that falling onto the ground, that it was not going to come back to him. He had tried to lie down again on the bed, but it didn't help, and he'd gotten up again and wandered out into the hallway outside of this bedroom, and looked to his left, and then to the right, down this hallway space, to find a door on either end, and no signs of anyone. So to his left he went, because it was somewhere to go, as he fought back a yawn and tried to figure out where he was. When he opened the door, he wandered into a kitchen, a smell of food and cooking drawing him further inside, as he found himself headed for a table with a bench for seats, and was sat down before he knew what was going on. He watched as Maureen, the old lady of the house, was gliding about, and then came to a stop in front of the table with a plate, which she slid down in front of him. Good to see you're still alive, Mr. Marcus. We have need of your services and a collection of papers which you have. You took them and read them, I guess. She nodded affirmatively and sat down across from him. I haven't been able to get any of the sides to agree to meet with one another, and I can't stall your co-worker, Mr. Fixing, for much longer. Okay, well, what do you expect me to be able to do? I'm not the world's most convincing person. She had waved her hand over the table, and the papers and the notebook he'd gathered from the general appeared before him. He glanced at them and then back at her. I think you actually are a little convincing, and you might be our best hope, you might not be, but either way, you either do it, or this war against the witches and knights begins up again. I've heard you say you don't want war. He nodded, and she was gone, vanished from sight. He could only sigh and begin to eat his food as he looked over the documents. The papers were mere agreements with the Black Knights, Castleworthy, and the Rock Kingdom for mutual help and aid. The alliance was formed due to pressure from forces believed to be witches threatening the kingdom, dark witches. The scrawls as signatures meant nothing to Marcus, but he noted them anyway, as, well, they all looked like the same signature, only different names. Perhaps Black Knights had forged it, or maybe not. The notebook was long, however, and he'd finished his meal already before he could get to it. And the room didn't feel like a place to look it over, as many people would come here searching for food, and, well, it was best not to be seen reading a vital intelligence. Marcus left the kitchen in search of a better place to read, and decided against any reading room or library for the same reason the kitchen wasn't any good. People would wander in and out, and he'd be discovered, which would then prompt questions about what he was doing and what he was reading. Questions were always good, but he needed to prepare himself for such things, and, well, maybe just avoiding some questions was good. Eventually, he settled on his bedroom he'd slept in last night, since few people would know where he had slept, and, well, it was quiet. And so he settled there, on his bed, reading the book, which, as far as he could tell, as he settled back on the bed, lying back to read it, covered basically the Black Knights, and that was it. Page after page gave him a detailed look at how the communication between the witches and knights had been formed. Then what the knights had wanted out of all of this power and the ability to overthrow the king. Not unusual stuff, but, usually one didn't record it. But there was nothing about why some witches would want this. It was not a surprise, but it would still be of some help to sort things out if he knew why they wanted this. He snapped the book shut and rolled off the bed, planned to go talk to anyone who was willing to talk. His walk had taken him to another bedroom. When he threw the door open and marched in, was surprised to see both Timothy and Henry, his page boy and squire, fast asleep. Neither of them would be much help, though he was glad that they were alive and that they had been of some use during this job. So he backed out of the room, careful not to wake them up, and failed to notice that the troll was not around. Stepping out of the boy's bedroom put him in a dining room, one that had a long table that spanned out in front of him, with lots and lots of chairs, ones that looked equally elegant and uncomfortable to sit on. Marcus walked a few feet down, looking about the place, and all of its splendor and expensiveness. This dining room clashed with the rest of the house, in its downtrodden state. He stopped when he spotted a group of women at the far end of the table. They were looking at him, sneering at his presence. Marcus wasn't sure if these were the witches responsible for the betrayal, or just witches, maybe. But there was only one way to find out, and he began walking towards them. As he marched, he passed a line that cut the room into two sections, and on this line was written East Side and West Side. He had been on the east side of the room a second ago, and now was punching his way down the west side of this dining room, headed for these ladies. He didn't know why this was done, but figured it might help out any servants who had to tend to this place. When he got to the ladies, he stopped in front of them, and he was pretty sure that one of them was Louisa, the wild witch who'd schemed with the knights. "Who are you, and why have you infected my presence with your presence? I don't want an ugly man around me, especially one who doesn't look like he knows how to wear clothes." "I'm Marcus of the Bumbling Knights, and you, witch?" "Louisa Grant, the fairest maiden witch of them all. I don't need a knight or rescue, though if you could get me out of here that would be appreciated, but I still don't want you around even if you could." Marcus blinked, his head already starting to feel like it was swimming in muck and mire of fast talk. This person was asking for something, and the less he thought about it, the better he felt he would feel. "I wouldn't help you for 1,000,000 coins. What I'm here for is to understand why you have decided to destroy the witches of the woods and this town to gain power." She ignored him, as she and her entire entourage of ladies stood up and headed towards a door on their left. Louisa was surrounded by her people, and Marcus could only barely see her among the dresses that swished about as the ladies covered her retreat. This did not sit well with him, and so he decided to follow, just to see what else he could get up to. They'd gone into a hallway next, and because he was following them, things seemed to speed up. These ladies were all rushing the woman Louisa forward to get away from him. He strolled casually, keeping pace with his long strides as they tizzied about. His only fear was that if they got to a room before him, it might change before he caught up. He hoped the house was on his side as the ladies disappeared through another door that he came up to. The chase continued into an office that did not have another way out of it. The collection of women protecting Louisa had gathered in a corner, with the woman safely tucked behind them. The space was not a typical office, but it did have a few tables and many cabinets for work files. Marcus looked at the sad sight as he came in and then around. There appeared to be no way out unless there was a secret way, so he chose to lean against the door to block that way. If you'll answer a few questions, you'll be left alone by me. Never! We are the protectors of magic, guards to the rightful claim of the throne. Marcus narrowed his eyes at the statement of the two ladies. Had they just basically told him what their ploy was? Get rid of all the parties and claim victory and the throne and, well, maybe. Miss Louisa, if you want to survive all of this and not be thrown into jail by the Queen, Miss Queen Eugenie, I believe, I suggest you talk to someone fast. It does not have to be me, but I would avoid running back to the Rock Kingdom and trying to talk to them. Their king, I don't think, knows anything, and, well, if you're seen with the Black Knights, that's just going to confirm what everybody already thinks. So, unless you really want to be an outcast, probably should talk to one of the people in charge. The Lady Louisa came charging out of her group of guards, her hand up, looking like she wanted to cast magic, but no sparks or light came from her hand as she just held it there, a disgusted look coming across her face. What do you even know? He held up his book. An account from the perspective of the Black Knights about how things were going on their side, and how the witches were helping them create a war. Louisa took another few steps forward, holding out her hand now for the book. Marcus shook his head no. If you're not willing to hand the book over, then I take that you aren't telling the truth to me. I thought so. Not worth the time or effort. You think too little of people and the truth, Miss Louisa. I have told you the truth, and now I'm going to go find General Howitzer Dark to see if he would like to talk. You had first choice. Talk or let others talk for you. She glowered at him and then slowly slunk her way backwards, melting back into her group, disappearing into them. He could only sigh. No one wanted to give an inch and save themselves. They must figure that all sides would hold out and that the war would commence again. Last chance for any of you to talk before I leave. I don't know how witches do torture, but I have been in your prison and it ain't pretty. Also, torture? Not very fun. Been through that as well. There was more glowering at him, though this time from the protective lair of ladies, and maybe Louisa somewhere in there, but he could not see her, so he shook his head at the sight, and he opened the door to leave. He emerged back into the dining room they'd been in before, and slammed the door shut behind him. If people would just talk or be nice to one another, this matter would be at an end. But no, they wanted destruction and or power to come to them through planned means. He hurried his way from one end to the next of this dining room. The general would be his next person to talk to, as long as he could find the damned man. He'd just about gotten to the door on the other side when it opened and Cassia came in and stopped to look at him. He didn't stop, as he tossed the book into her hands and grabbed her arm to bring her with him. He let go a second later and looked about in the small box space of a room that he had entered, and then to his left. The familiar yet annoying buttons were there. He pressed a bunch and stood back. What's going on? Why are you giving me this book? I've been told I need to talk to the people responsible for this mess to try and straighten it all out. The book contains the Black Knights' records of how they wanted to start the war. Cassia opened this book and began poring through it as he closed the door to this room. A jerk and then another jerk to the floor made it feel like they'd moved somewhere. Marcus opened the door to look out to see what was beyond. It was the front door to this house. As much as he'd like to just march out of this place, he couldn't. So he closed the door again and waited for the room to move again. It did so, but this time it felt like they kept going and going with no stopping. Cassia eventually elbowed him to draw his attention as she'd finished reading the book. He found the book slapped into his stomach and grabbed it before she let go, and it dropped to the ground. "I see that they kindly wrote a bunch of information down. How nice. What is your plan?" "Well, I was going to go talk to General Howitzer Dark and see what he says. Then we begin the process of gathering everybody into one room and let them shout at one another until they've shouted their heads off." "That's not much of a plan." "It's all I've got when no one is willing to cooperate and talk. But put them all in the same room and watch mayhem unfold until they're all drained out and we can talk-ish." The room jerked to a stop and the door opened all on its own. Marcus glanced out, but whatever was beyond felt unseeable into. Cassia peered in as well, and she pushed him into this space. With no lights and unable to feel anything in front of him, Marcus took only a few steps forward, then a few more steps to see what might be there aside from pitch black, his hands out there feeling for anything, but nothing was coming to him. The door to the elevator room had snapped shut and left them blind in this darkness. Cassia, did you come out of the room? Are you there?" "Yeah, you still here?" No idea." "Sounds about right for you." He turned towards her voice and stuck out his tongue, since there was little else he felt he could do. It was a very mean comment, and he did not like it. But with that accomplished, and feeling a little better about himself, he continued wandering through the darkness. Then, as he was going, he felt like he'd run into something that wouldn't let him go any further forward. He turned, keeping this object to his left as he kept going to his right, and found that his feet felt like they were sliding and slipping, and he turned and kept slide-stepping his way forward, keeping this thing, potentially, this wall, maybe, to his left while he moved forward, just in case the ground suddenly wasn't there. And then there was suddenly light all around. It faded a bit, so that things weren't so bright, and Marcus found himself able to see again. He blinked when he saw General Howitzer Dark chained to a chair, sitting there snarling at them, and that someone had come to disturb him. "You two." Yes, we came to talk about things. You know, the war and how it hasn't gone your way. And we have a book detailing how you planned the war. The usual for these kind of talks. You know, we want you to talk." The general snorted and shook his head. "As if I care who knows about my plans. I've told everyone far and wide that the war was coming, and that I would fight against the witches till the last breath. You fools have only momentarily stopped me from achieving victory over a dreaded group of people, all of who seem to want to use their powers to enslave us regular people." "You lie, General. Witches have never done a single thing to hurt regular people. We've only survived against your threats and harsh treatment." "A witch would say that, but dark witches have been assassinating more people in power and regular situations than any army has ever done in its life, especially mine. And what do you have to say to that, witch? That it does not justify trying to wipe out an entire group of people. Even if it does in your head, the reality of the matter is you can't go around killing people. At least not without a proper casus belli, and one that hasn't been forged in fake kidnappings of a princess. Those sort of things don't hold up to the Council of Kings, and you probably won't have your king there to protect you against any such investigation. Pretty sure he's going to turn on you the second he can to get away, and to keep his head." The general resumed his snarled look, but was sullen and quiet. "Talk to us, and we may be able to ease the way for a better situation, as much as I don't want to help you." "Otherwise?" "Oh, well, we can let you try and argue your point to a higher power after you try and argue it out with those that you've damaged. If you get to the higher power. But the queen of the witches, Miss Jeannie, might not even let you get that far." The light flickered for a second, and then the chains holding the general started falling away, undone by some unseen hand. The snarl on the man switched to a grin as he rose from the chair. "And now you two will feel my pain." "No, they won't. You can't move without my allowance, and you will find yourself in severe trouble if you try to move in such a manner." Marcus glanced over to his right to make sure that the old lady Maureen was there, and he wasn't just hearing her voice come out of nowhere. And since she was standing right there, he looked over at the general, who was snarling again. "You fought your battle, and you didn't get very far at all. Now, sir, you must face the consequences." The general spat off to the side as he moved towards them, holding his hands up. "We will see who faces charges." "Oh, and you think you will get past the Queen to the Council of the Kings and, be set free again?" I merely threw that idea out there to give you hope, to maybe make you talk. I know you get further than the walls of the prison in the city. The Rock King isn't going to listen to your appeal if he finds out he can throw you to the wolves and claim ignorance, which I believe is exactly what you want from him, wasn't it? Ignorance, so that you could do your war and he could go about doing his business, right? Howitzer Dark came to a stop as he thought about this, but did not say anything. Instead, he continued his march into the dark room beyond them. They were all soon back in the dining room, with everyone gathered there. Everyone, aside from the troll, Henry, and Timothy, though. And the two sections of long space were divided between the witches and the Rock Kingdom. The witches were down on the west side, with the Queen sitting near the middle, with the Rock Kingdom all here on the eastern side. Marcus strolled his way towards the line that cut the room in two, a feeling of exhaustion overcoming him. Was all this over now, or would it just be covered up again, with more people pretending that nothing happened, and that it was best to keep the status quo? Upon getting to the divider line, he dropped the papers and books onto the table and stood back. "We are gathered here to stop an event of war, to find peace, and to bring those that have caused it to justice." All attention focused on Maureen, the old lady witch, who was now floating in the air above the table, right next to the center of the area and the line. "To that end, it has been discovered that General Howitzer Dark and Louisa Bright of the Witches have been working together to overthrow order, and because General Dark wants to kill witches, they came up with a plan." Everyone seemed to be shuffling about to get better seated for what surely would be a long story. Marcus shook his head. It shouldn't take that long. "Between them, they have found out about an old peace treaty, one that marries a prince and a princess together should there ever be one from their respective homes and kingdoms. The family lines from that treaty still exist, but on one side are no longer in control of the witches. They were going to use all of this to bring about what they wanted: chaos, a new ruler, and a new king of rock, potentially." Yes, my dear love, you already explained all of this very clearly to me already, so let us just move on. The king of rock, who had said this, was trying his best to get up onto the table, which was not going well for the old man, and Marcus shook his head. This king was trying to get his new lady, but, well, it's felt really silly to look at that man trying to do all of this. And, making matters worse, this whole group really did not want this to come to an end, did they? Not a single one among them. If they could get away with it, they would. Enough of this. Louisa and General Dark wanted power. They used a princess from the Kingdom of Rock and a poor magician who had connections to a past family that may have had power, and they used that to try and fake kidnapping. The King of Rock does not care about any of this, because he wants his head to stay where it is. He also only pays attention to trading goods. So, Queen Jeannie, if you want to get him to pay attention, offer him some trade deals or something. Otherwise, throw the whole lot in jail and go talk to the Council of Kings about what has happened. Having said all of that, Marcus stepped forward to the table once again, and then pushed the books and papers towards the queen. She sat there at the table and looked at what was being directed towards her, and then up at him. "And what about you?" "I've done my job. I returned a princess to the Rock Kingdom, King, and I now have all of my people back who started this adventure with me, and I probably will not get the second half of the payment owed, but I doubt I'll ever see a lick of that, so whatever. Why?" "I hope you don't think it is improper, but you, too, are tied up in this. But you are too tied up in this to just walk out. You brought Cassia back to the Witch's Woods. You brought the Black Knights here, and the Rock Kingdom leader. You, Sir Marcus Bumbling Knight, are responsible for a lot of damage. And what do you want from me then, Queen? You must also pay a price, Knight, for your disruption of order to this world." He nodded. It was fair, though what she had in mind for him was not what he wanted to think about. The rest of the table was now all looking at him, so he stared back, trying to get them to stop. "As for the matter, King of Rock, you have broken a peace treaty. What do you have to say for yourself?" "I merely was acting in the interest of my kingdom. I have no recollection of ordering a war, other than what General Howitzer Dark has told me. Witches have been attacking our trade routes. You broke the treaty first." "I see. Do you have any proof that we broke the treaty first?" The king, who'd finally stopped trying to get up onto the table, looked over at his general. Dark looked at him, and then shook his head. "No. I started a war to remove the dark witches, and all witches. I don't want a stronger group of people whipping my soldiers. I can't have it, and I won't have it, and you witches are a cursed breed of beings. As for you, King, you're useless." I was misled. I was told that my country was being attacked, and that my head would be put on a pike if I did not act by my people. I can't have my head removed." All the attention had shifted to the king, who was now sort of backpedaling, trying to get away from the table. "You are lucky, King. Take your princess and her new husband away. I can't do anything other than refer you to the Council of Kings. They will deal with you. As for Louisa Bright, you people are all talk, and I'm going to prison. So what? I'll be out in good behavior in no time. Just send me away already." Queen Jeannie snapped her fingers, sending Louisa and her entourage of followers away, and then looked over to Howitzer Dark once more. "Last words before I send you to the dark pits of my prison, General?" "That there are more people willing to risk their lives to destroy witches than you know. This is only the beginning to an end. You will soon be gone, and I will be out." The queen snapped her fingers once again, and the general was gone. A silence fell over the room, and what few people were left didn't really seem to want to look around anymore. There was the king, Maureen, Jeannie of the Witches, Cassia, and Sir Fixings, who sat there rather amused by the whole thing. "Well, Queen Jeannie, I, Sir Fixings, am appreciative of your dealing with things in such a clean manner. I've come to negotiate the king's release for the knights sitting out in the field. I can promise upon release of the king that the army will pack up and head home. There will be a fee of 200,000 silver and copper pieces that will be paid for destruction caused and his return. It can be paid in installments if you wish, but I'm sure you and your tradesmen can come up with the money however you wish." Sir Fixings nodded and rose, sticking out his hand to shake on it. The queen, however, waved her hand and produced a piece of rolled-up paper in it. "This is a new peace treaty, and I'm sure both sides are eager to return to quietly dealing with no war between one another, especially when it comes to trade going back to normal. Add into the fact that I can find these dark witches who may be hurting the king's pockets, and I think you'll get the idea that it's a good idea to look this over." The Rock King eagerly shook his head yes, but Sir Fixings offered a numb grin. "We will, of course, take a look at it and make our adjustments, within reason, as we did have a fight that just ended in a stalemate, so we cannot make too many requests, probably, but we will make some." I'd expect nothing less. You are free to go, but remember, regardless of signing the treaty, you will still owe 200,000 coins to us. Fixings nodded, then grabbed a hold of the king and began dragging him out of the room. The man did not want to leave, and he was holding his arms out for the still hovering Maureen. She stayed there, with her arms crossed, looking rather disappointed with him. As for Cassia, you left this town when you're accused of robbing an artifact from the Grand Museum, which isn't much of a museum, but it is one of the few ones we have. And as a result, you promised to not return. Yet here you are again. I felt it was my duty to return with what was going on. Witches were threatening with kidnapping, and that doesn't fit with what I know of our type. I felt it was worth the risk. Cassia held out the light orb that she'd used not long ago and placed it on the table. Your item that was stolen from the museum. She rose, then walked away, with Maureen following her out. This left Marcus and Jeannie, and he stared at her as she looked at him from her chair on the line that split the room in two. So, what will you do with me? Prison? Expulsion? Torture? Mind you, I've already been through a lot of torture, and I've already seen your prison. And, well, I should say that I did try and stop all of this fighting. Yes, and you still hold some remnants of poison in your body that I can see. At least that's what my magical senses on your aura tell me. So, you did do some good for us, and for that I will say thank you. Well, you're welcome. But I cannot have you stay here, and I can't send you to prison, because if anyone found out like Cassia, then things would get dirty, because she would probably try and break you out. You make people, for whatever reason, like you, and I don't have time to deal with the likes of you, or fighting other witches when I have to rebuild a town and find dark witches. So, what to do with you? And your answer can't be nothing. Preferably no, it should not be that nothing happens to you. I do have one solution, though I think it might annoy Cassia, and I'd rather not leave. What is this plan? Well, I believe you can magically sense how my body is dealing with poisons. Then I'm guessing that you can already see that my aura doesn't necessarily line up with the timeline that flows here. She shook her head, yes. Well, I can tell you that I've been thrown back in time. Maybe. I believe anyway, I'm not entirely sure. And maybe if you use your magic, you can send me back to where my time is. The Queen considered this, and then raised her hand to snap her fingers as she looked at him. Are you sure? This could wind up going wildly wrong for you, and since I've never seen your timeline. Well, no, but I guess yes, because you're not going to just let me walk out. As you wish, but I think you should say goodbye to your friends first. I don't like it when people just disappear from their friends. She rose from her chair suddenly and began walking off in the direction that Cassia had gone. Marcus stood there for a second, trying to figure out why this sudden interruption and move, but it did not make much sense to him. Come on, there's no putting this off. Cassia was biting her thumbnail and pacing about the waiting room as the Queen and Marcus entered. She looked up and then over at them, her eyes on Marcus, and then turning to the Queen of the Witches. Well, what's the plan? What are you going to do to the man who helped save, though damaged, helped also damage our fair city? Well, Knight Marcus, what do you have to say to the young witch? Well, there was no simple solution. Neither the Rock Kingdom Knights or the witches are generally going to look the other way at what's happened and what I caused. Even if I were to flee to other continents, spies and people will still find me eventually, probably. You're running away. Yes, but it is a bit more involved than that, and I guess I'm sorry? Cassia rolled her eyes at this and looked over at Jeannie, who was also shaking her head. Queen, would you care to explain, since this idiot is talking in circles and failing to say what he needs to say. He thinks I can return him to his time period. Well, can you? Well, since I've never seen it, and I've never been to it, so probably not, but maybe. Cassia threw her hands into the air. It isn't a great solution, Cassie, I know that, and you yourself said that the fact that I am from somewhere else changes things between you and I. Because I figured at some point you were going to try and find a way home. You would leave me here, and then I would be out a friend who helped me get back here, of all places. Again, I'm sorry. Do you want to come with me? I mean, I have no great qualms against someone coming with me. It might not be the best idea since we've no idea where we're ending up. Plus, it could lead to death or stuck in some sort of void space. It doesn't sound all that great and pretty now that I think about it, and probably you should say no. Cassia, do you want to go with him? She threw up her hands again, looking confused, and took a short lap around the room. Marcus figured that the answer was no, but stayed quiet. The door on the other side of the room then opened, and the two young boys, Henry and Timothy, came in, led by the troll, all of them looking like they'd just woken up. Oh, well, this is going to get more difficult now. It's good to see you again, Sir Knight Marcus. I've been working on what I wanted to do when it comes to being a knight, as you asked. Well, Timothy, that is good to hear. You are a young man, a page boy, barely. So what decision have you come to on that matter? Have you come to a decision on that matter? No, I haven't really. I guess that's what I should have expected. But you do have plenty of time since you are a young boy, and we will think over it as you grow. By the way, Henry, do you have any thoughts on that as well? I don't think that being a knight is what I'm good at, sir. Plus, I rather liked trying to steal from that guy that we stole the paper from. Of course, you take all the wrong lessons from that theft. Oh well, I guess, some lessons must be taken into it. What about me? I help so much, and I deserve a little praise. Yes, you do, troll. And if you're in need of a job, I'm sure the Queen here, or maybe even Lady Smoke, can help you out. I don't want to work for any of them. I want to work with you and your knights. Marcus flinched. With him leaving, it would be hard to convince his boss that a troll would be a good thing to have around the office. He could send a letter along with the troll, but the boss didn't like to read things unless he really, really, really had to. I will see what I can do on that front, but unfortunately, I will not be returning to the agency myself. Then let me come with you wherever you are going. Where are you going, sir? Henry had approached, and the two young boys, both of them, had begun to crowd closer to him, making him uncomfortable. Henry, who had asked the question, was on the verge of reaching out and grabbing at his hand, and had managed to get a hold of it. He's running away because people don't like him, although people do like him, but they don't like him. Don't the people in the office not like you either? And yet you still work there. There's no reason to run away. Yeah, it's true that my fellow knights don't like me all that much, but that's because I make them do work. Do they know, by the way? He nodded his head yes to her. Know what, sir? It was Timothy this time asking the question from his side and grabbing at him, and looking up with rather questioning eyes that just said, What's the answer? Marcus forced himself to grin. There was one bright side to this line of questioning, and that they hadn't resorted to asking why, at least yet. Once one began the questioning of why, it always seemed to be followed up by another why, especially from young men, and young ladies as well. That I do not belong here, and frankly neither do they, but we've all been sent here and established a somewhat stable lives. What? Yes, what do you mean that you were all sent here? He looked over at Cassia, who had her hands on her hips, looking utterly confused and furious that he had not told her any or all of this. The queen, however, seemed curious, scratching at her cheek as she looked off in the distance, trying to compute what he was saying. It's, as I've said, the lot of us were thrown back in time, or maybe forward in time. Not entirely sure on that matter. It might even be we were transported to an entirely different area, planet, life. I have no way of knowing for sure, other than we talk the same language. Well then, we shall go find out all about this, shall we? And with that, she snapped her fingers, and a lot of them, all of them, disappeared. They all reappeared a second later, inside the main office of the humble, bumbling night agency. It was quiet, as only Persephone and Roscoe were at their desks, and they were busy looking over papers. Marcus took a step forward once he felt that solid ground was under his feet. Roscoe, is the boss in? Yep, always into the office, planning things. Marcus and the group moved for the door, which drew Roscoe's attention as he realized who had asked him the question, and that there were a few more people there than he expected to be there. The door to the boss's office opened with creak that never gave up and kept going on no matter how slowly or quickly the door was opened. The boss spun about, mad. His office was being disturbed. That was now filled with pin boards and papers, with string racing between these boards, and that stood in the way of everything, even getting in. It was a spider's web that wrapped its way around. Marcus had drawn one of his daggers and sliced through some strings so that they could enter. What, Marcus, you're back, and ruining everything. Why do you do that? Yes, well, I've wrapped up the job, though I think I left Castleworthy unsatisfied with how well I did it. But it's done, and the princess is saved. Oh, good. And you got payment? Half of it, at least, from the Black Knights, who are also paying Sir Fixing. Good. No. He waved his hands at the crowd behind Marcus. What's all of this? This is Queen Jeannie of the Witches, Cassia, who is also a witch, a troll who needs a job, and, of course, our two work boys. You two, Henry and Timothy, are dismissed, by the way. You can go home for the day. They decided to stay where they were. Okay, so what's going on then that you needed to disturb my research? The Queen Witch here is interested in how a bunch of people got thrown about through time or space or something to here. I'll leave you with her, with this witch queen, to discuss matters, because perhaps you can explain it better than I can. Marcus turned and began heading out again, with his group of friends following him, and Cassia grabbing at his side. Except for the queen, who stayed there, was now, her hands on her hips, looking questioningly at the boss. Marcus had headed right for his own desk upon getting out of his boss's office. His movement slowed as he sat down with the group crowding around him, and Roscoe and Persephone joining this little group. Marcus, how did you... Magic, and the boss and the witch are trying to figure out if they can get us out of here somehow. You could go join them if you're curious about that. His two co-workers were off in a flash to the boss's office. Are you okay? He looked over to see Cassia was still concerned, and he felt for her. I am tired, exhausted, and I want to go home, or to a nearest bed if possible. All that is pretty standard, though, for a night. How are you? Nervous. I don't want to suddenly have my friend gone, but I also should express that we cannot be more than that, even though it feels like there should be more than that. Why, dear Cassia, why? It's part of a witch's curse, potentially cursed. I might lose my magic if I were to get in a relationship with someone who cannot cast magic. It also happens to most witches and wizards if they find and consummate a relationship. I don't think I can risk that. Oh, well, that's interesting, I think. You're not willing to risk it for somebody? Not yet, no. Okay, I guess. Well, maybe we should just stand here or sit here and wait for word on whether it is possible to travel through time. I'm sorry, though.
What does any of that mean?
Marcus looked over at Timothy, who was leaning against the nearby desk. Tim. Let me, how do I put this? Do you remember our trip to get to the Rock Kingdom? The boy nodded yes. The best way I can explain, I think, is that it's a bit like that. Only, instead of being stretched out over just a few days, it is stretched out over years and maybe centuries or decades or beyond. You're moved very quickly from one point to the other, but very slowly. Maybe. The boy nodded again, though Henry could tell that what he just said was not getting through, and he wasn't even sure if he understood what he had just said. And then the door to the office was thrown open, and out came Jeannie, who stopped and then shook her head no. The lot of you are nothing more than troublemakers, and this whole idea of you being sent from elsewhere through time is imagined, even though you can see our aura that it doesn't belong here. That can be faked by magic. You are wasting my time for nothing. Here I thought there might be some undiscovered magic that I might be able to tap into. Well, I can argue your point and say that it is real, but I don't think you're going to believe me. No, it is not real, sir. You are a liar, and for that I shall do what I thought of not long ago. She raised her hand in preparation to snap her fingers once again. Marcus grunted, sighed, and sat back. A second later, he vanished upon the snapping of her fingers. End of Part 8. The end of the Bumbling Humbling Nights. Thank you for listening.